Welcome
to the Bring Me to Life podcast.
It's time to wake up
and shine on. Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Bring Me to Life podcast. Shannon Shine here.
Yay. And a Selomon.
So we are excited to be getting back into this podcast. We've realized that fall is our prime. We like to work on some of our personal projects and productive content during the fall. Summer's just been like crazy.
So, summer's too crazy. Too much going on. So many activities, so many events. We thought we were going to, cut out a lot of the events. So let's not go to this many festivals, and it just ended up being, instead of festivals, weddings.
Yeah, it was like the year of weddings. Everybody we knew is in the path of getting married. It's pretty wild, actually. I guess we're at that age. We're also at the age of, I feel like even though summer was really busy, it was full of wild spiritual and personal growth. I think that this was the summer of really just like acknowledging who we truly are. At least it was for me. I feel like I've really kind of dove into
more
that.
Authentic.
Yeah. That's been the theme, is to be authentic. Embrace you, even if you're weird.
Yeah. I mean, if you are who you truly are, then you will start attracting people who will resonate with that, because if you pretend to be somebody you're not, then you'll just attract similar people who are not the same as you, and then it just doesn't resonate.
Resonate.
Disresonance.
I think that going into this far in our podcast too, it's exciting to know that our audience is in it because they enjoy what we have to say, and it's important for us to be authentic. I'm just excited to not be sugarcoating life anymore.
Yes, and we're gonna do our thing now. Here we are. So
that being said, I think we're gonna dive into what spirituality means for us now, because I think spirituality changes for people throughout their lives. So I would love to hear what your explanation is, and then I'm sure I could babble about mine for a little while.
Well, spirituality to me is like basically like my connection to the universe, connection to God, however you feel more comfortable accepting that. And I think everything is made up of energy, but I think there is a spiritual world and what I like to call the astral world. I just feel like spiritual energy manifests through the different layers of the aura field. And I feel like the spiritual world is just like a higher vibration in a way, almost like our soul, our energy, like that. Maybe it's just like vibrating at a higher frequency. And I don't know. So yeah, my spirituality to me is like my connection to the divine, connection to God. And it's a big term. It's kind of vague sometimes. It can be very vague.
Definitely pretty vague. The reason I brought it up is because people are like, oh, you're a spiritual coach, or oh, you guys are covering the topic of spirituality. What's that mean? And it means everything that you said, but also for me, it means like the connection to our bigger purpose. I think it goes into that deeper question that we all ask, like, why are we here? What is the universe? Like, what is our connection to the greater power or God or great spirit or any of that? And like, this is one you like to ask me, is like, what is your why? Like, what is your why for existing? But it's also like, what is your why for almost everything you do? And I think that's where religion and spirituality start to get intertwined, because people who are deeply religious, which to me, there's a big difference between religion and spirituality.
Yep.
People that seem very deeply religious, God bless them, they are really into a very set of rules, basically, or they're just indoctrinated with this path that they have to take.
Belief system.
Where spirituality is kind of the opposite of that. It's kind of like taking all of that. I talked about this in our last podcast too. Taking everything you thought you knew and were programmed to think, and kind of throwing that out the window and just rebirthing yourself and your connection to why you are here. Not why other people want you to be here, not why some book tells you you're here, but why you're here.
I think the most important thing is like having your own connection, your own experience, and being able to explore your own spirituality for yourself is really important.
Yeah, I think that's key. Is everybody's definition is going to be different, and that's why we have created such a safe space here with the Bring Me to Life Network and community, and we welcome all different kinds of paths of life. I mean, you've visited a ridiculous amount of churches, a ridiculous amount of spiritual community events,
temples and ashrams, and because I feel very connected to the divine, and I feel like, for the most part, the people who are there want to have that connection, and they have that desire. And so I'm pretty, I can go into a lot of different environments and be okay. And so I felt comfortable putting myself in those positions, and everybody I met was like really into it. And regardless of like how fucked up the religious system is, like there's genuine people who are looking for spirituality, and I'm really excited to have space to share with people who want to explore spirituality for themselves.
Definitely. I feel like this is a good segue, since you're talking about like welcoming all the different religions and like connecting with people in that way. I think it's interesting. You go by Selomon, right? You know who else welcomed all the religions and different things into his temple? There was the theory, of King Solomon, who also was like the one guy in the Bible that's like, whatever you believe, as long as you believe in something. That was kind of like his whole premise of existing, and he welcomed so many people, and he brought a lot of different people together, and I think that's why they were willing to listen to him as a king, was he was willing to hold space for them in a different way to just be them.
Yeah, I would say a love-hate relationship with the current version of the Bible that's out there right now. And this is something that I've even been outspoken of to my family and have like mixed reactions. But there was a very specific king in England named King Henry. And what he did was he basically took over the religious society in England. He forced every church to read from his version of the Bible, which he had other people like. He was basically taking over religion in his country. And
is this the same guy that took all the women's good stories out and made them all look terrible?
A very possibly could be. You would have to look that up.
But I need to do some research.
Yeah.
I used to know all of this at one point, but it became less important to my personal. Anyway, go ahead.
So King Solomon, I feel like he did welcome a lot of the religions, but also in a version of it, they talk about he was basically he was thrown out of the house of God or whatever because he welcomed all the religions. And I don't think it's because he welcomed all the religions. Maybe he got like carried away in some specific things, but I think being open to different religions is an okay thing. I don't think God's going to get mad at you. I think the one thing is you got to realize that, yeah, there are all these deities and idols and stuff like that, but what's important is that we understand our connection to God is the same as all of their connection to God. We have that same power and we have that same connection. And I know it's kind of messed up because that's one thing that Jesus was talking about, don't idolize people. And then people go around and start idolizing him, which
he'd probably be so pissed.
It's a little frustrating to me, but yeah, so I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
that's okay. There's actually like an episode of Orville about that, and like they accidentally go back in time, and the one main chick, she ends up being like idolized like a god because she brought technology, like Jesus brought us energy healing and faith and just believing in ourselves and all of that fun stuff. But they started idolizing her, and it was really frustrating because that's not what the purpose was at all. The purpose was just to give them tools to better their society, and then they instantly started praising. So that goes back to go. Let's just go back to spirituality for a minute. So there's all these different books that you said there's different deities, gods, goddesses, all of those things. Yeah. And there's so many different religious paths. So me as a spiritual person, I've been looking for truth in all of them and have found bits of truth in all the different paths.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, you're this spiritual coach. What is your actual path? And I'm like, there is no one path for me. For you, there may be. But if you walk into my altar room, I've got a picture of Mary Magdalene. I've got Lakshmi on my ceiling. I've got the chakras. And then I'm connect to the King Solomon and Archangel Michael. Like for me, spirituality is all of these pieces of my life that have given me purpose, that have reminded me why I want to exist here in the physical. Would you say that you found truth in various religions, or do you have like one set path?
I have my own path, and there was a saying, I'm not sure who said it, but they were saying all paths are the right paths because it all leads to the one. Like in the end, we're all going back to source. That's how I feel.
And source is like that ultimate love, which I feel like a major hippie when I go to say love is the answer. But I mean, I guess when I say I find some truth in all the different paths is the ones that lead to love. What brings love and joy. And I've worked with clients in my practice and they're like, I'll ask them like, what brings you joy? And they'll be like, well, I don't know. I didn't realize that that's what I was after. And I'm like, well, if you're not after joy and you're not after like a bigger purpose here, like why are you existing? I mean, is there something maybe I'm missing? Like, are you after anything else in life? Like joy or success or like...
Well, I feel like for the most part, the human condition is to better ourselves. That's one thing that Picard always talks about.
Oh, definitely.
Is that, as a human, we have the potential to become better than we are. And I think that's one thing that a lot of us strive for. And maybe the people that you've worked with that didn't realize, they weren't following a higher purpose or their joy or making themselves better. Maybe it was because society instilled a system within their vessels or whatever to run basically like an anonymous or like a robot, like go in, you do your work, you come home, you sleep, you wake up, you work, and then you don't go forward. You don't get out of that cycle.
Kind of like a sheeple cycle.
Right. So that's what I'm thinking is that, and I've seen it a lot, this society for a long time has been set up to create workers in factories.
It's true. But I think we're breaking out of that.
Absolutely.
I think that's what's happening is like as computers kind of start taking over some of our mundane roles in the workforce, that people are getting laid off and then they start their spiritual journey because they're like, man, I've committed X amount of years to this industry and now I'm just like, I'm not useful anymore. So they have to go out and find that purpose, like I said, and like they either connect with a religion or they go down a spiritual path. And I really enjoy when people go out and they start kind of diving into all the different things. I've had I feel like a spiritual journey my whole life. I've always kind of questioned God. I went to church for a long time and I still go to churches, but I feel like I've always been that kid that really just pissed off preachers because I had the most...
you always ask questions.
I know I get mad at other people for asking me questions I don't know the answer to, but I love to ask people questions that they don't have the answers to, especially when it comes to religion. I don't mean to. It's just... I want to know. Like,
no, I think it's important to ask questions, and that's why I probably do it so often. Is because in my mind, there's never a stupid question because that's one way that you can learn and grow.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I get really upset when I don't know the answer to questions because, I mean, I don't think I know everything, but I want to. Yeah, yeah. It's like I know I'm smart enough to know I don't know everything. Sometimes I don't feel like I know anything, but when I really don't know the answer and it seems like it's something simple, or if it just seems like why is that important? If it doesn't seem like it's actually like a detail, you like to ask me questions like super serious details, and I'm like, I don't know. I didn't even think about that. I didn't think to ask that question.
I know. I mean, we all have different questions to ask, and imagine if we all ask different questions, we all get different answers, we all learn more.
True. But going back for a second, so I feel like I've had a really spiritual path, more than a religious path, through my life, because I've had some serious questions since I was really, really young. Questions that preachers and parents and adults could never answer for me, and to the point it almost made me feel crazy. So before I get into why I think I'm crazy, I would love to know like what your first spiritual experience is. Like, what was something that really just stuck out to you? Like, wow, this is a spiritual thing that just happened.
That's a really good question. And I've always felt like I was spiritual. I've always felt like I've had a deep connection to the angels and to God since, I could ever remember. But there are a few specific times that I remember just like being like, this doesn't add up. Like just being in church, like some of the things that they preached about, I definitely didn't resonate with, like the whole thing about love, and then the whole thing about people being gay and going to hell and shit like that. But there was one specific time I remember. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old or something, and there was a TV on, and it was on the History Channel, and it was talking about the Hindu religion or something, and they talked about being in a reincarnation cycle. And
I love the reincarnation theories, all of them.
And how you keep reincarnating until you learn what you need to, and then you break out of that. But I was going to church basically every Sunday at that time, and I remember specifically them talking about how believing in reincarnation was bad or something. And I remember being like, I totally believe in reincarnation, even though like I had never thought about it at all my entire life. But that moment I was like, I totally believe that's true. And I'm like, I didn't get that from anywhere. I didn't get that from anyone. I like heard it on TV, but I felt it, and I felt like that was the truth. I was like, that there's like something not right that the church is preaching about, because I totally I just feel it in my being that this is like a real thing.
I agree. Like that was one of the questions I asked a preacher, and he just looked at me like I was evil. Like, why would you even think that asking me this question's okay? And I was just like, I have these dreams. Like I have dreams that I know have happened. Not in this life, maybe not even in this realm or dimension, but they've existed and they've made me who I am in this life.
Can you talk about one of these dreams?
Oh man. Maybe in a few minutes, because right now the story I have in my head is my first spiritual experience, one of my first ones. I feel like we're going to do a whole episode on past lives, because you have some intense past lives. Definitely. I have some intense past lives. Definitely. We'll dive down that rabbit hole in just a little while. But first, so one of my first spiritual experiences, when I was really young, I started talking to these energies. And to me, I could see them. Like, when you're a kid, they're like, oh, yeah, you have imaginary friends. I am fully convinced that adults tell kids they have imaginary friends. One, because they don't want to believe that kids can see these energies. It makes them feel crazy. And I think they're jealous that most of them can't. I'm going to fully admit here that I can still connect with spiritual energy. That's like part of my existence and how I work and channel things. Like sometimes I say things and it's not just me, it's spirit. But anyway, so when I was a kid, I started talking to these energies, and they were like my best friends, because my family's really busy. I was an only child for like the first 7 years of my existence, and I would buckle these energies up, even though they didn't need buckled up. I knew they weren't physical, but I would call them things like Michael and Raphael. And I talk about this in my my spinoff podcast, Shannon with Shannon too. But that people probably thought, this little girl's watching the Ninja Turtles and like talking to the Ninja Turtles, because there's Michael, Raphael, all of them. But I also talked to like Ariel and things like that. And now that I'm an adult and I've done lots of research to make sure that I'm not crazy, there's the archangels, and the whole premise behind the archangels is how they are there for you through traumatic events. Well, I had many a traumatic event as a child. I think most children do. Yeah. But mine involved a lot of like death and moving around. And, I feel like I'm not alone in that. So I don't put myself on a huge pedestal and use that as a victim. But I had a lot going on, and I started talking to these energies. And the adults convinced me that they were just imaginary. And for a while, I like pushed it off. Well, then when I was 6, my mom had passed away, and I started really talking to spirit in a deeper way. Like I felt like I could hear her. But before she passed away, I kept telling my grandma that the spirits, the people that I was talking to that she thought was imaginary, were telling me to prepare myself and to enjoy my mom, because I wasn't going to always have her. Well, that just pissed everyone around me off. They're like, why would this child say that her mother's not going to be around?
Scared them.
I scared them. I was getting premonitions as a kid, and I was telling them that wasn't the only one. That's the most dominant one that I can remember, because that's the one where people were like, don't speak like that. Don't talk to these energies anymore. They must be dark. But they were preparing me. They were very lovingly preparing me so that I wasn't an insane child. Because even after my mother passed, people were always like, how does she handle this? Like, I handled it better than most of the adults. And granted, as I grew and I hit my teenage years, I had some regressions to let go of, but that's beside the point. Let's jump over to the actual more spiritual things. So that started happening. People think I'm crazy. I'm talking to dead people. My mom actually died, and they think, what is happening? This girl like told them this was going on. Which, by the way, when my mom passes away, I'm in church praising God, singing to God, and it's actually my theme song. It's the song I use, so I'm not completely against religion. I feel like God had a bigger purpose for me. The universe has a bigger purpose for me. I'm just very against the like putting it in a box. Like there's some older, like there's some older God man viewing me from heaven, telling me I'm going to go to hell for being awesome. I don't know. So anyway. I try to get past that point, but I still go to church and I'm singing this little light of mine. I find out my mom passes away. Let's fast forward a couple months, and I've been talking to my mom. She's passed over, and I go to this soccer game, and I'm not very good at soccer. If those that know me, you should know I don't like to run very much. I'm not a huge.
You have to kick the balls.
I love kicking them. I don't mind kicking them. They tried making me goalie, but I'm kind of scared when they come really fast at me. But I love like punt kicking a soccer ball just across the field. But anyway, for some reason they decided to put me on the front line, and I kept getting the ball. I guess I shouldn't say I kept getting the ball. I was supposed to be getting the ball, so I was supposed to be pretty alert. All of a sudden, this energy, one of my, probably imaginary friends then, not really, but, calls my attention to the sky. And I'm staring at the sky, not at the sun. People are like, oh, she was staring at... No, I was just staring at the sky, and I see this opening into the clouds. And I feel like there's this energy just beaming into me. Again, not looking at the sun, just looking in the clouds. There was a song called like Holes in the Floor of Heaven when I was a kid, and it was like something that got me through. So I'm looking at this hole in the floor of heaven, and all of a sudden I look back, everyone's screaming my name, and the ball comes right at me and basically hits me. And then I know, that's the funny part. So it hits me, and I look around. I've just been channeled this energy from the sky, and I look around, and every living thing has a rainbow around it. And I'm like, what is going on? Everyone's still screaming. Yeah, it was definitely a game changer.
It's like one of your superpowers got activated.
It definitely got activated by getting hit with a soccer ball first in the middle of this like download.
Maybe it was just like that was part of your experience to help you remember, but maybe it was just like the floor opening up that gave you the gift.
Yeah, it's also when I started realizing that I think my life's a movie, because that's definitely something that happens in a movie. Like, absolutely. There's been so many spiritual times in my life where I'm like, okay, there is a God somewhere, and he's getting a kick out of my life because it's a movie. So that was my first big movie scene, and everything started having a rainbow. So if you haven't connected the dots, I'm starting to see auras here, and everyone's yelling my name. I still have the ball. So I just kick the ball, and I run off the field kind of crying, like, does nobody, what's happening? Like, I think the world's like coming to an end, and no one else sees the rainbows. Obviously, it's just me. So that's when I started seeing auras. And my dad, like, he tried to take me to a doctor basically because everybody else in the family told him he had to. He thought he didn't really care about it. He was just like, whatever, it's Shannon, she's artsy. But so I started seeing auras. And it got to a point where I started getting migraines, and then they gave me glasses. I've worn glasses since like the 2nd or 3rd grade, mainly so that it could help me focus into the physical realm. It wasn't until I got older, I had to completely turn them off for several years before I could like get old enough into my teenage years to start realizing like, oh, there's this thing called auras. Nobody thought to mention that to me as a kid. Yeah. I guess it wasn't as big in the early 90s.
Right, it's becoming quite popular, like way more mainstream. Like,
I would love for a kid this day and age. I mean, I don't have kids, but if a kid came up to me and was like, "I see a rainbow," I would be like, "Yeah, sweetheart, tell me more. Like, what color is it? When did you start seeing these? Does everybody have a rainbow?" Like, I want to talk to the kids about this stuff, because one of my mottos since that all started happening for me so young was, as a spiritual leader, this role that I've been thrown into by the universe. I want to be somebody that I needed when I was younger. I want the kids, the teenagers, anyone that's like going through these spiritual experiences, even the adults that have been like repressing it for years. I think that's why we do what we do, especially why I do. That's my why connected to spirituality is I want people to realize you all aren't crazy. This is happening on a spiritual, a serious, a physical level, and people aren't talking about it. They're making it taboo, like some sort of like, I don't know, sex topic, something that makes people feel yucky. But I guess it's kind of like we're all coming out of the spiritual closet now. Like, sorry, that was a really long tangent, but I felt like it was one of my most intense spiritual stories. And it's something I can't explain. Like, there's no other explanation other than the universe or God, if that's your term, wanted me to have that ability and to have that moment. And there's nothing else that can explain that to me. There's no science. Like, I didn't have a concussion or anything. I didn't get hit that hard with the soccer ball. Like, people are like, man, she must have got hit really hard. But I really didn't. You know, like, kids can't kick that hard. But it was alarming. It woke me up from my daydream of staring out into the sky.
Brought you back into the physical.
Definitely. But oh wow! So that was my tangent about seeing auras. I'm sure I'll talk about it more. I did talk about it in my Shannon with Shannon podcast on energy and things like that. But
I feel like you and me were basically like a generation of spiritual beings that incarnated at this time, so that as people are waking up, we're here because we've been through it and we're allowed, like, we have the experience to help them in the best way. In December 21st, 2012, that was a huge
that's
shift.
when everyone thought the world was ending?
Everybody thought the world was ending, and it was about the apocalypse. But I remember hearing a lot about the apocalypse more than being an end of the world, being like a revelation of the truth. And so it opened up the doors for a lot of people to learn all the stuff that we've already been blessed to learn, so that we can help them as they are waking up. And I think it's still going on. Like, I think people are still waking up to the truth.
That's crazy. Like, just kind of you saying that unlocked a bunch of memories. Like, there's this guy that worked with my aunt, and he was obsessed with that date and like thinking the world was going to end. And then when it happened, I remember walking in and being like, so what happened to the world like ending? And he was like, oh, it was a miscalculation. It's going to be this date instead. Right. And that's happened to him at least 4 times. But I think what it is exactly what you're saying. It's the world doesn't end. There's a podcast that I listen to, and she talks about like the world doesn't end. It's the people that aren't on the same vibration as you will start to fade out of your reality and just live on a different vibration.
Right. Like in The Flash, they talk about this. There's like an infinite number of Earths that exist on a different frequency.
The multiverse.
And, you know, Bashar also talked about this, where he talked about it in terms of like 2 trains are going down. And the trains, the further they go, the more they split apart. And so, like, the more we live, the longer we live, the harder it is for us to, like, shift our frequency to a different timeline. So the sooner that you can begin the journey of just getting on the vibration of the right planet for you, the better.
It's important to like tune in just again like what feels like joy for you too. Like, I think that's why it's a beautiful thing that we do have a multiverse, and there are so many different dimensions. Like, what brings me joy might not bring someone else joy, but they can still have their joyful life and be right. I think that's where spirituality and religion give us this power to create our own reality. Religion, I think, kind of puts it into someone else's hands. It puts it into the Almighty Guide's hand. And yes, there's like a universe that allows us to tap into its energy, because energy can't be created or destroyed. But for somebody who is very adamantly religious and has a very, very joyful like vision of life, and like their life is going really well, then that's beautiful. I'm not hating on them at all if that is like their way of life. But that's not what brings me joy. It's not what brings a lot of people, I'm realizing, joy. And it's just, I think that it's important for us, if we're going to keep reincarnating here on the physical, I think that's where we're going, is that reincarnation is just finding that ultimate joy for all of us so that we all feel like we're home and create that as above, so below construct. Because I'm also somebody, so I'm curious about your point of view. And I think after we talk about this, maybe we'll jump to a different podcast. But so I personally, I don't know. I feel like I changed my view on what heaven and hell is a lot for the longest time. And I think right now, I believe that it is what you make it. Like, if somebody doesn't believe in hell, then whatever their version of the afterlife is what they're going to create. Because once their energy ceases to exist on this timeline, they're going to go into like their void. So if they believe in heaven and they believe they lived a good life, then they'll go to heaven. If they believe in hell and they think that they've committed sin or that they don't deserve to be in heaven, then they're going to create that hell for themselves because they're going to keep replaying those memories over and over. As somebody who talks to spirit, I call it like the timeline review. You review everything that you experienced in this lifetime, and you decide if you want to celebrate that or if you want to punish yourself for that. And it's not up to anybody else. It's not up to this magical God figure to tell me if I did right or wrong. It's up to, I guess that's where my ego does come into play. It's up to me to make that decision of what's right and wrong. How do you view the whole heaven and hell construct? I'm curious.
Pretty similar to how you explained it. And that movie with Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come, keeps coming up.
What a powerful but intense movie.
Absolutely. It's very powerful, very intense. But in the movie, it's like a lot of what you're talking about. When he passes away, he goes to like this field of flowers and meets some people that are very important to him in his life. But his wife, who died thinking she did wrong, ended up going to her own hell that she had created within herself. And I think that as we pass away, our soul leaves our body and goes to, you could call it heaven, you could call it whatever. It's a different dimension. It's a different frequency. And I think it's one that whatever intention or whatever you have, I guess as we live on this planet, we have in our minds, we have our thoughts. So as you pass away, whatever's within there, like those things will manifest instantly. So you can manifest yourself inside of a hell, which would just be you creating that experience based on how you passed. But I think, since we are all like reflections of the divine, we can return to source and be one with all if we wanted to. If we could like open our being up to that possibility. I'm not sure how ideas and because I keep wanting to say like thoughts, whatever you have in your thoughts are going to manifest, but because we'll be spirits and souls, I don't know what that would be like.
Well, I think it's that we don't need physical things, so our thoughts are basically what we have. I think that's why but like futuristic movies often have like people becoming more telekinetic and able to speak without actually speaking. I think that's kind of what evolving more into spirit is going to be. It's speaking with your mind. It's speaking with hieroglyphics, which we now use basically emojis as hieroglyphics to speak. Like people can have full conversations with just pictures.
Yeah.
Now imagine
symbols.
if we didn't have, imagine if once we've downloaded these symbols as a collective consciousness and we don't need the technology anymore, we can just look at each other and send each other like the laughing emoji and know that we're thinking about something funny, and then that funny thought just kind of like pops in. I think that's kind of what we're moving towards, and eventually we won't need the physical bodies. We will just exist as spirit. And maybe that's just a timeline, because I think that, again, part of the reason we're physical is that God, or the ultimate universal energy, it wants to have this mystical physical experience. That's why we keep reincarnating.
Yeah. It's like a school.
Yeah, it's definitely like a school, and it's a movie for the entity that creates us, whether that is a god, a energy, an alien, whatever. There's something out there that's watching us. And that's why we have these synchronistic series of events. And that's why we create movies and we create games, because we want to feel that same connection to source by creating. Whether you create art or you pass time with a video game, like that's you connecting in like a godlike power, especially if you're playing games like The Sims and stuff like that. Like imagine if your sim character in your video, like your computer, had an actual thought. And like you are God that's telling all these characters, not just one, but dozens of characters in your video game what to do every day. Because in your head, you're like, oh, I want to build my house to look a certain way. I want this person to mate with this person so that I can have this alien baby. You know, the Sims 4, they can have alien babies, or whatever sim. Like one of the newer Sims, they can have alien babies. But anyway, you're basically playing God. And you're making all these interactions happen because in your head you have this bigger plan, or at least it's making it entertaining for you. And that's what I really feel like the universal spirit is. It's like it's just playing us like a Sims game. So we when it gets frustrated, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna keep this character's outline, but I'm gonna drop it into this new house and lifestyle. Boom! It's just here's your new life.
I think it is definitely partly that and partly a co-creation, because it can drop you in an environment, but ultimately like it's not talking through you. Like you can't tell your sim character what to say to another one, really.
We still have free will. I mean, the sim characters still pee all over the place and like do things they're not supposed to.
Get mad at you. And
they definitely have their own personalities, but that's what made me start thinking like, I remember being a teenager and starting to have those thoughts, and it really creeped me out. And I was like, what if my Sims characters have real lives inside my computer? I think that's part of why I can't play video games. And I don't understand maps in video games to save my life. And I'm also very bad at directions in this physical world. So it seems to be a running thing.
That's okay. Why there's like other games like Mario Party. I
can rock some Mario Party. I feel like that's something that I'm going to put on my to-do list very soon.
Yes. I think it's important to, get that time. Life can't all be so serious and hard.
It's true. Like, stop being so serious. Like, enjoy life. Find your why. And, yeah, I think once you realize what your version of heaven and hell is, or, like, how you judge yourself, for me personally, it's made me a lot less afraid of dying. And I think it's a conclusion I had to come to as I lost people. And I think it's why I've handled death better than a lot of the people I've been surrounded by through my 10 plus major death experiences of people close to me. Like, I realized that they're not gone. Energy can't be created or destroyed. If anything, they're working on reincarnating into an even better life where they're going to be even better off than they were here, because that's part of it. Like, you reincarnate to level up. At least I think so. I hope so. I hope I'm leveling up each time. I know sometimes in past lives I was in a different financial situation, but I also feel like it's part of the experience. Like, I want to experience, like you said, we do have a co-creation. We want to experience different things. We don't want to also just be the same every life. What's the purpose of that?
Right. Like, that's what, like, some of the people we're talking about on different podcasts is, having free will is kind of magical. And say we go back and maybe we're an angel, or maybe, we're something else. And like, that's great, I'm sure, but there's just something kind of magical about having a physical body, having mass, like being able to touch the wall and my hand doesn't go through it.
I like how you're touching the wall like they can see you. I'm commentating for you so they know what happened. He's touching the wall. It's very solid.
It's an illusion. I know that. I know it's 99.9% space, but yet
it's keeping you dry.
It's keeping me dry
and warm.
My hand, I can't go through it unless if I punch it.
Yeah, let's not do that. Cool. So I think that we've talked a lot in this podcast, segueing into like past lives and angels. So I'm excited. I want to talk about those topics, but I feel like they're so deep that we need to dedicate podcasts to them specifically. So do you have anything else you want to kind of bring up about spirituality while we're here on this topic? Any other like experiences or anything, or we want to save them?
I would just like to say, for anybody hearing me, if things resonate, take them and use them to your benefit. Yeah. If you don't resonate with things, that's fine, because like I said, we're all here to have different views. I think it makes life interesting. It's like adding different spices to different meals.
I like spices.
Exactly. It gives a variety. Variety is important.
It's true. And we're not here to offend anybody. I really I hope that my new unsugar-coated way of approaching spirituality is not offensive. I think it's important for people to know that do think this way, that they're not alone, and that it's not wrong to believe in Jesus, Mary Magdalene, but also Buddha and Lakshmi and Ganesh and astrology. Like, believe in what feels good to you.
Yes.
And you might have things that feel good to you in one part of your life that really don't later. And maybe you're processing some programming or processing a different past life where you were super Christian or super Buddhist or super atheist or whatever. And allow yourself to just experience the journey and figure out what your why is for being here. And that doesn't have to be like your bigger purpose. Just what is your connection to your existence here? I think that that's how people are going to find what their spiritual connection is. And I would love to hear more about it. So wherever you're listening, leave us a comment. Let us know that you made it this far, because you just listened to about 40 minutes of us releasing a little piece of our souls here,
Yeah, we'd love to say hey to you wherever you are out there in the interwebs.
We want to talk. We want to be your friend. We want you to find us at bringmetolife.com, on Stitcher, on Spreaker, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook.
iTunes, iHeartRadio.
All of it.
Spotify.
I want to know where your favorite place to listen to us is. Where do you find your high vibe content? So let us know. And until next time.
This is Selomon.
And Shannon Shine. And I hope you stay awake and shine on always. Bye. For many of us, spirituality is just the quest to find essence or true meaning, and to really just connect with a higher consciousness.
Connecting with your spirituality is very important in this life. By becoming mindful of all of it, you can realize where you are, and if that is leading you to where you want to go.
Listen to the little simple things, because it's those little simple things that are going to shift you vibrationally in such a way that will prepare you to become very intuitively minded and ready to step forward on the next part of your path.
I hope you can feel the love that's inside you, it's inside me, that connects us.
Thanks for shining on with us.